Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, our new narrative. And today, we're going to go through a lot of historical information. So a lot of this stuff will be new to some people, be a refreshing course in American history for others. But as the saying goes, the truth shall set you free. And the truth will also piss off a lot of people. But with that said, before we get into this, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Share this information if you're getting something out of it. It helps spread the truth around. I'm going to give you all the, sources where I'm getting this information from. So I'm going to get right into it. And I just saw this video again the other day, and it just inspired me to do this video.
Donald J. Trump is now president of the United States.
I am your father.
For the first time ever anywhere, the 45th president of the United States of America.
I wonder how her life is right now. All right, but anyway, check it out. We're going to start way back in England before we get to America. So in the 1730s, a group of people, for the first time in human history, came up with the idea to form a group to oppose the institution of slavery. Now let that sink in, because that's very important, because modern day school systems will tell you basically that slavery started in America. So just let that sink in. It wasn't until 1730 years or so after Christ died that a group of people formed something called the Abolitionist Society. And that was in England. Now, the first society of that kind in America just so happened to start in 1776. And one of the founding members was Benjamin Franklin. And other abolitionist societies around that time were mainly in the South, believe it or not, right? And where am I getting some of this information from? Okay, so we can go to this book, A History of the American People, written by yours truly, Woodrow Wilson. And the reason you probably never heard of that is because he used terms like savages for Indians, Negroes for Black people. So I guess now the school system wants to protect everybody's feelings and hide this history. But more importantly, most of the stuff in there goes against the current narrative of Black victimization. Okay, so we got to 1776, and now we're going to move up to 1832, right? What happened then? Well, the Democratic Party was formed. Why? Two primary reasons: to protect the institution of slavery, which most of you guys know, and also to try to get rid of the central bank, America's central bank, which Jackson successfully did. Now in 1832, why did a political party need to form to, protect the institution of slavery when slavery apparently was dying out, right? After, 1776, they were like, hey, let's throw this thing in, let's get everybody, let's form this union. We'll leave the slavery stuff in there because it's dying out anyway. But hey, it's 1832, slavery's still around. What's going on? Well, something called the cotton gin that you heard about during Black History Month. That revitalized basically the institution of slavery in the South. So money makes the world go round. So they needed a political arm to protect their money, right? And so with that said, they had to come up with, somebody to protect it, right? A way, like some type of form of thought or ideology, right? So this dude, now this, I'm not going to quote from this book, but it's a ridiculously long book. Okay, it's like 900 pages in 6 font. But it gives the history of slavery going all the way to Athens. You got the Spartans, you got Sparta, you got Rome, going up through the not modern day, but for its time, because it was written in 1850 something. Modern day transatlantic slavery. White Christian slavery. If you want to know anything about slavery, this is the book for you to get. And you won't see this in a school system, a public school system anyway. So basically, the people in the South came up with a theory to protect slavery, and that theory or ideology was basically white supremacy. Although, and it's kind of strange or funny that I think this book came out in like 1854. And in this book, he basically says the Negro race doesn't deserve freedom. He needs to be in chains just because he doesn't have the capacity to appreciate freedom, whatever. Now he's saying, strangely enough, he's saying this compassionately. Okay, so if you're going to read books like this, you have to take your 2020 morality and put it on the shelf and just go back to that date and time before Twitter, before, the telephone, before TV. Because he's writing this book and you had a Black attorney in the United States at the time. So if you don't know that, Google it. Anyway, so The Sociology of the South, written by this guy named Fitzhugh. And the reason I want to bring this guy up is because of the way he thought, his perspective on the institution of slavery, right? And basically what he concluded was that basically slavery is the ultimate security in exchange for someone's freedom. The slave is taken care of from the cradle to the grave, whether he or she is productive or not. Right. So if you want to say, oh, he's defending the institution of slavery with that. Right. And then he contrasts that with the North. What was individual freedom in the North? Well, you had to take care of yourself from the cradle to the grave, and you were free to starve in the streets. So while he's in the South saying, hey, we got this great institution, we take care of our slaves, the people in the North, they're free, especially the free Negroes, they're free to die in the streets. We need to keep slavery because it's the humane thing to do, so to speak, right? Now I'm gonna divert from him for a second and go to a book or a person you should all know or probably heard of, or you will at some point. De Tocqueville. So in 1834, he rode through America and gave his opinion on American democracy and how things worked, how things were working well, how things weren't working well. And one thing that caught my attention in that book was he said, basically, in the republic that was formed here, with its democratic way of voting, the mother of all sciences is association. Basically, you need to get as many people under your tent, right, to vote for you, as many issues as you can under your tent as a political party, so you can get as many people to vote for you. That sounds so elementary, so simple. And I'm gonna come back to that later, but just keep that in mind. The mother of all sciences, he said, in 1834, was association. So keep that in mind. So we're gonna move up to 1850. And then you got the abolitionists here who were putting on so much pressure on the slave owners in the South. Again, they had to come up with a way to defend it. And like I said, I think I just said, white supremacy was one of those ways. And it's crazy that they came up with white supremacy because from 711 to about 1492, what we know of Spain was under the rulership of Moors. Something else happened in 1492. You guys are probably, your ears probably perked up. Oh yeah, that's when Columbus supposedly discovered America. Now this is interesting in and of itself because that book I showed you here, The History of American People, which was written, I think, in 1902. The History of Slavery, which was written in 1857, I believe. they all comment on the fact that Columbus landed in Hispaniola, which is the modern day Dominican Republic, right? DR. Yeah, Dominican Republic. All right, Haiti. So if everybody knew that then, how did we start saying Christopher Columbus discovered America? Well, we'll get to that soon. But I want to go back to George FitzHugh, because this guy, just his perspective is amazing to me. So I'm going to actually quote from this guy. Now, you got to remember, this guy was a prominent voice in the pro-slavery movement of the time. And this book that he wrote, get out of the way. Sociology of the South. He talks about the failures of a free society, right? The crime, the homelessness. He believes that the free man was the slave to capital production, with or without the responsibility of long-term care. So he was saying that the free man, whether white or black in the North, were basically slaves to the capitalists, and the capitalists got off easier than the slave masters in the South, because the capitalists in the North didn't have to take care of the workers when they weren't working. All right. So I'm quoting from this book here. You guys can pick it up. It's on Amazon. So the poor man is burdened with the care of finding a home and procuring employment and attending to all domestic wants and concerns. Slavery relieves our slaves of these cares altogether. And slavery is a form, and the best form, of socialism. Let's have a round of applause for socialism, ladies and gentlemen, is basically slavery without the whip. Now, he goes on in another part of the book that says, with Negro slaves, their wages invariably increase with their wants. The master increases the provision for the family as the family increases in number and in helplessness, right? It is a beautiful example of communism, where each one receives not according to his labor, but according to his wants. I'm bringing this up because you won't hear this anywhere else, right? The media definitely won't share this with you. So just keep that in mind. And the last but not least, I'm quoting from him again because he's so quotable. No slaveholder was ever so brutal as to boast of the low wages he paid his slaves, to pride himself on feeding and clothing them badly, neglecting the young, the aged, the sick, and infirm. Such a man would be hooted from society as a monster. Society hardly tolerates inhumanity to horses, much less slaves. Now, the reason I'm bringing this part up is because the only narrative I grew up with concerning slavery was evil slave masters, right? And in here, this pro-slavery guy was saying that that's not the case. Now, I'm sure they were evil slave master guys because people like Frederick Douglass talked about them. People, in this book, even Woodrow Wilson mentions the mistreatment of slaves, the history of slavery. People are, the mistreatment of slaves are mentioned here, but here is mentioned throughout the world, throughout history. So if you wanted to be a slave, you didn't want to be a slave in Sparta. You wanted to be a slave in Athens, because in Sparta, rough time being a slave. And guess what? There were no black slaves there, I don't think, right? I mean, they were mainly Caucasian people, right? So, all right, so let's go ahead. This debate, basically, slavery without the whip, i.e. socialism, versus individualism and capitalism, individualist, capitalist, whatever you want to, the term, you get what I'm saying, right? That argument or debate ended up in a civil war. And the Republicans, the know-nothings, the free soilers, these were political parties, and the abolitionists formed a single party called the Republicans. Why? To end slavery. Okay? The Democrats, 1832, formed to protect slavery. The Republicans formed to end slavery, right? So the Civil War basically was the capitalists versus the socialists, in my opinion. Let's just dumb it down to like the simplest denominator. You had the individualists and the capitalists in the North, and you had the socialists, pro-slavery people in the South, led by yours truly, the Democratic Party. And as we all know, the Democrats and the people in the South, the Confederates, lost that war. However, with the assassination of Lincoln, the Democratic leader, Andrew Johnson, became president. And you know what happened? The people who wanted slavery basically ran a country where slavery was illegal. So they had a problem. How do we maintain power, right? We can't champion slavery anymore. So in the conversation with amongst President Andrew Johnson and Montgomery Blair, they came to the conclusion that politics is no longer about slavery. It's about race. The key to politics is no longer slavery, it's race. And with that mindset, the Socialist Democrats got the executive branch of the United States, right? And they got to write the history. And they've been writing the history of the United States ever since. So anything that goes against their narrative, you don't get to see. But thanks to the internet, I can find books like this that was written in 1857. It's actually free if you look for it online at archives.com. So is A History of the American People. Go to archives.com. It's free in the Kindle version, PDF version. And even this, I don't know if this is free. It should be free, but I actually paid for this one. So, but this one is not free. All right. So moving ahead here. Speaking of rewriting history, it wasn't until around the 1900s that people began to say that Christopher Columbus discovered America. That narrative, the narrative controls everything. That goes into that white supremacist narrative. We did it all, right? We even discovered America, even though the dude never stepped foot on American soil. Okay, so the Democratic Party, if you don't know much about them back in the day, because they're not going to tell you this either, opposed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the point where President Johnson got impeached, right? A lot of the Civil Rights Act, the vast majority of the Civil Rights Act that was passed in the 60s was presented in the 1860s, right? Under Andrew Johnson. He just kept saying no to everything because he was a Democrat. That's what they did. And here comes identity politics, right? Because before the Civil War, what was the identity politics? Black people couldn't vote in the South, where 90% of us were, and those in the North were so 10%, they're spread all over the place. Their vote hardly counted if they had the franchise to vote, which most of the time would mean that they had to own property, which some did, okay? That's something else that they want to teach. So here comes identity politics. Hey, brother man, we just gave you your freedom. Vote Republican. Cool, right? So you try finding a Black Democrat in the South after 1865. Okay, so they all were Republican. Now, the problem with freedom was, among other things, how you survive. How you gonna survive? You got generations of people who just were working on farms with no agency at all, no need to think about their future, to how to save money, how to be thrifty, none of that, because someone else took care of that. And then the next day, boom, you're free, right? Free to starve, basically. So what you will see in this book, Reconstruction, is the organizations like the Unity Group or Unity Organization, that the people in the North came down from the South to help the newly emancipated and the poor whites understand what capitalism and individual liberty means. And first and foremost, it means self-responsibility. You have to obtain the skills other people are willing to pay for. And that's what Booker T. Washington's goal in life was, to teach skills to the newly emancipated that other people were willing to pay for. Okay, now, again, they're free, the black folks, and they didn't have any protection, because as a slave, if you were killed, if a white person killed a black slave, you had to pay the slave owner the slave's worth, right? You just can't go around killing. At the time, they were deemed someone else's property, right? So now they're deemed no one else's property. And so for those who wanted revenge or hated black folks because of the predicament they found themselves in, there was no protection for the black people, and that's where you got a lot of violence toward blacks. But first, that violence was towards Republicans, right? So if you read up your history on the original formation of the Ku Klux Klan, they were after Republicans. And like I said, try and find a black Democrat in the South. You could, right? So since race is the key to politics for the Democratic Party, you get the Jim Crow era. Yeah. And so when reparations are talked about, here's where I think people may have argument. But unfortunately, the people asking for reparations are all Democrats. So you end up suing yourself, basically. Now, I digress. Even with all that, the violence against blacks after the Civil War and during the Jim Crow era, is nothing like the violence that black folks are perpetrating amongst each other in our modern day urban cities. Okay, so with socialism defeated after the Civil War, and all we had was capitalism, America produced the greatest economy the world has ever seen. Now, I know Trump is touting the greatest economy ever, but he's talking about the stock market, which is totally separated from our actual economy. So yeah, we may have the highest stock market ever, but as far as the world's greatest economy, no, that happened after the Civil War, up until socialism crept back in the early 1900s with the Wilson administration. Now, Wilson wrote this book while he was the president of Princeton, so before he got into the White House. But Wilson and his administration, the Democrats, realized hey man, in the South, in some states, half of the state were black. So they need to get some of these black votes. Right now we got the franchise. And what they did was they got prominent black figures of the time, like W.E.B. Du Bois, the socialist Marxist, to try and get black people to vote Democrat. Worked a little bit, but not that much. Lots of Jim Crow laws were passed, pushing race to the forefront of everything, and white supremacy. And of course, there were a lot of, it was hard times for black folks back then. But guess what? On every metric, every statistic, black families, black people were on the uptick. Slow, but on the uptick. But there was always that racist guy lurking around the corner. So what the politicians did, they used that to their advantage by saying, hey, vote for me. We'll take care of you because these white racists will never hire any of you, so you can take care of yourself. So just vote for me, trust us, right? Sound familiar? Okay, so later in the 1900s, the FDR came up with the New Deal, which was more government support, socialism, for votes, and that attracted more black people to the Democratic Party. Now with Lyndon Johnson, he came up with the Great Society, and that sealed the deal for the black vote. He also took us Americans off the gold standard. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The narrative, Black loves the Dems, came about around this time. And why? Because they pushed that, hey, the government's going to protect you from the white racists everywhere. Vote for us and we'll keep you safe. It became a protection racket, which resulted basically in the welfare state. And around that time, in this book, we find The Future Once Happened Here, written in the 90s, and it's talking about the 60s, I believe. So I'm quoting from this book. The African American Teachers Association of New York, representative of most urban teachers associations, said individualism and personal merit was a myth perpetrated by whites to create Black versions of white middle class or Black Anglo-Saxons. What they should have said is individualism and personal merit is a myth perpetuated by capitalists to create Black versions of middle class or Black capitalists. But see, you can't really, that doesn't have a political clout or, what do they call it? Political, what's that term? Another term, currency, right? So I go on to quote out of this book. The African American Teachers Association called for an alternative Black value system, indicating that, this is me talking, indicating that there was another system in place, right? Now going back to the book, alternative Black value system based on principles of collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics and unity, giftedness in Black children could be measured by a willingness to challenge authority. This is me talking, not by gaining skills others are willing to pay for. So these teachers are teaching your children, or taught you and me, because right after this, and basically this is socialism in another way of saying socialism or communism, collective work and responsibility. Right? So after the Great Society, more socialism and socialist policies are ushered in, especially in the urban centers, and it's in the school system. And that's when I show up in the 70s, right? And guess what else happened? The destruction of the Black family. Not my fault, but these socialist policies with the goal of destroying the patriarchal family view, because hey, in this book you'll see how a lot of the teachers unions back then associated the patriarchal family with white. Now how's that when you got Nigerians with patriarchal families, or Chinese people, or the Inuits, or the Eskimos, or the Native Americans, right? So how's this a white thing? Anyway, these policies are put forth in like Detroit, Michigan, Baltimore, Chicago, and you see what happens after that happens. Like Detroit was a beacon of capitalist success. I mean, Detroit was a place where a former sharecropper, white or Black, could go work in a factory, raise a family of 5 or 6 or more, right? Get a pension, right? Without a college degree. What happened, right? Economic flight was turned white flight. People were running from these socialist policies, the same type of policies that got people running out of California, right? Incidents of racial violence made non-racist whites, the media show you these, the Malice Green was the first one I remember from Detroit. Then you get Rodney King and all the, the guy in Texas who got chained up and dragged by the Klansmen, right? I mean, if it bleeds, it leads. All these incidents of racial injustices were played up and pushed on us. And I'm not going to say they shouldn't have done that, but the effect of that was a lot of white people started feeling guilty and a lot of Black folks wanted revenge. And what we got was Obama. Right. And so Obama was the answer to everyone's prayer. I remember when he got elected, I was in a bar crying when they announced that he won. But I wasn't crying like this woman.
I am so sorry to my world. I am so sorry to my world. This is not what we want.
I was crying tears of joy, y'all. I was so happy, so proud that the country I grew up in left to live in Japan and swore I never wanted to come back. Came back in tears, literally, getting on the plane crying, coming back here. Because my worst day in Japan was better than my best day in America, and I can pretty much still say that. So I was crying tears of joy, but later I started to realize something. What Obama was a socialist. He was an articulate socialist. But he was a socialist. And as a capitalist, someone who believes in individual responsibility, individual freedom, I don't really vibe with socialism. Because as Fitzhugh said, this guy, socialism is slavery without the whip. So me and Obama have some disagreements. And since he's the head of the Democratic Party, I have some different disagreements with the Democratic Party. It should be okay, right? But no. If you disagree with Obama and you were white, you were called a racist. If you disagree with Obama's policies and you were black, you were called a sellout and coon by the far left, which is basically taking over the Democratic Party, right? And what they've done since they lost the Civil War, basically, is hide socialism behind racism, right? But I think now with the advent of YouTube, people like myself bringing this information to you, they feel like they're losing their grasp. This is their last hurrah. This is their Hail Mary, this 2020 election. If they lose this, that's the end of them. So, yeah, they're hiding behind, so they're using organizations like Black Lives Matter, racial incidents, to usher in socialist Marxist policies. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist policy. Their lead organization, their leaders are trained Marxists. On their website, they say they want to destroy or end the patriarchal family. How well has that worked for the Black community? So for all y'all non-Black people, think about that. Do you want to end up living in the Detroit I grew up in the 80s? I don't think you do. So now we got a choice, 2020, and it's basically the choice we had during the Civil War. We want capitalism or do we want socialism, right? The left is just going to play on your emotions and hide, their socialist policies behind, the government needs to protect everybody from every white racist, because every white person you don't know is a racist, right? Even if you're white, you might not be a racist, but that white person on the corner or around the corner from you is a racist, right? And they even changed the definition of racism. Like now you have to have power to be a racist. So I guess since the Klan doesn't have as much power as they used to have under the Wilson administration when they came back in full force, I guess they're not as racist. Idiotic, man. So again, the choice in this election is simply between socialist Marxism, i.e. slavery without the whip, or capitalism. Now, if you choose capitalism, you must understand that it's your responsibility to seek out skills that others are willing to pay for and to save for a rainy day. Now, this is a big statement, right? So if you're getting a degree in victimization, how many people are willing to pay for that? If you get a degree in computer science, computer engineering, mechanical engineering, doctor, lawyer, people are more apt to pay for those skills. Plumbing, electrician, right? That's what you want in a capitalist society. But the last thing I said was you got to prepare for a rainy day. So to be effective for a capitalist society to be effective, you got to have a currency or money that retains its value, period. Okay. And so going back to Lyndon Johnson in 1971, he not only did his administration create the welfare state, which just look at the effect it had on the urban Black family. He also took all of us off the gold standard. And what happened since then? Remember that sharecropper I talked to you about who can come up to Detroit, own a house, sending his kids to school, his wife stayed at home, all this off of one salary, right? Well, we can go a little further. This didn't happen overnight because I grew up on the Brady Bunch, right? And you have Mike Brady, who had not only took care of his kids, 3, he took care of his new wife's kids and her kids and her and a live-in maid. So one salary architect, he didn't own the firm, he was an architect. He took care of 6 kids, a wife, and a live-in maid off of one salary. Who can do that today? An NBA player, an NFL player? Most likely, if you're looking at this, it ain't you, right? So that has to do with not capitalism, right? It has to do with the dwindling value of our dollar. Now, I'm not going into that. That's a whole series, and you can go check out Peter Schiff and somebody else to get caught up on that issue, but it's important. So with that, I'm gonna recommend another book, and that's mine. So if you want to know how we got here, I think my memoir gives a good indication, right, of how our society kind of got here. Now, I wrote this it came out in 2017, won 2 awards. Pat myself on the back here. It's a pretty good book. And it just gives you a view of basically an individualist versus a collectivist, seeing America from the outside, seeing America from the inside. I don't want to give too much away, but I've just come out with a series called Ideas in Blood. The first book is NIAC, just came out. And what I want to do is, like the podcast and the new narrative, I want to take what I'm doing is taking historical facts that go against the narrative that's been produced by Democrats since they lost the Civil War, and present them in in an enjoyable format and not like this history lesson I just put you all through. So with that said, if you're still around, please like, share, and subscribe. Any questions for me, put them in comments. Let me know what you think. If I love to start a conversation about this with you guys. It's the weekend. Again, celebrate diversity. Share this with your friends, especially the SJW in your life. Speak with them. Have a conversation, not an argument. This vote is too important. Your vote, the ability to vote. A lot of people died for that. I know we take these things for granted, but a lot of people died for that. And for those women out there who, like this lady, is just so upset that Trump is the president, use your vote, right? Because the socialists, pro-slavery people were also anti-suffrage for women. So do women proud and vote. I don't care how you vote, but vote and know what you're voting for. And with that, I'm out. Hope to see you next time. This went a little long, but I think it was important. Hope you guys got through it. Again, like, share, and subscribe. See ya later. Have a great weekend. Peace.